Hola amigos at Retumba. I'm Stu from Blindfolded and Led to the Woods. Our new album, Rejecting Obliteration, comes out on May 19th. I invite you to check it out and let us know what you think. I would love to hear what you think.
Hello everyone, welcome to another interview. My name is Alfonso on behalf of Retumba, a Mexican blog. And today is with me Stuart from the band Blindfolded and Led to the Woods. Hello Stuart, how are you today? How's your day going?
Hello there. Yep, I am well. My day is going good. It's first thing in the morning in New Zealand, so yep, just woken up and here we are.
Well, thank you for taking the time. I'm going to take a wild guess and say that this one is your first interview for the Mexican page, right?
Yeah, yep, this would be our first interview with any Mexican publication, I think. Yeah, so thank you. It's really cool.
Well, likewise, thank you for the time. And well, during this conversation, I would like to, I'll try to the best of my capabilities to scratch below the surface of the band for anyone out there listening and interested in what the band are doing and has done so far. Me and the rest of the gang here at Retumba have been following the band for, I remember since the first album came out, 2014. And, watching the band grow and evolve over the years has been refreshing, to say the least. So now the band is presenting the fourth album with a pretty exciting form of extreme music. So I, of course, didn't want to pass on the chance to speak to you and, address your music.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And you've been listening for a long time. That's crazy.
Yeah, so I've seen all the change, and I would like to address all of the change, if you will. How to start with, just to icebreaker question. How have you seen the fan base change or react towards this gear shifting, or has the fan base complaints, grow, change to another, kind of enthusiast of the heavy music?
Yeah, I think I think that with our last album, Nightmare Withdrawals, was the first album that we really experienced like some quite full-on international kind of fans, just sort of all over the world. Like that album has gone into the most craziest countries, and we've sent merch all over the world, which like to us is just mind-blowing. I think in the early days we didn't really take the band as seriously as maybe we should have. So the last sort of 5 years we've really changed how we look at our own music and taken everything a whole lot more seriously and tried to take everything to the next level. We've always tried to outdo ourselves like every album, but yeah, I think the last album was a real sort of game changer for us, and
Like
we've talked to more people.
it was the breaking point, or the inflection point for what the band is doing, because basically you guys rebranded yourself from logo to sound to lyricism, I would say, to album covers as well, but the band name remains the same, and it's a peculiar name, I will say, because it almost tells a story in its own. Although sometimes it can be hard to remember. I lose track of the band because of it. I was like, what was the name of that band, And then I rediscovered you with Nightmare with Troubles a couple of years ago. So my question is, to this day, what meaning does the band holds, the name band holds for you, and what does the band stands for?
I guess the band name, like, it was kind of just one of those things that stuck when we made the band like 13 years ago or whatever it was. and we've just stuck with it. There's no like sort of great meaning to it really. We were kind of in that time where like long band names were quite like common back then, and they're not
Yes.
really anymore, you know. So, but you know, we've been pretty dedicated to it since day one. So we didn't ever really want to change the name, or it wasn't ever really an option. That's just kind of who we are and who we've been this whole time. So, yeah, yeah. No special meaning really. It kind of just is what we ended up being called. Yeah.
But as the band progresses into more mature or serious approach to your music, what would you say are the what does the band stand for in terms of philosophy or just discipline towards your own music?
I think that now, like, if you look at our lyrical content and even just sort of the vibe of the music, we're talking a lot more about like our own sort of life experiences, things that have happened to us along the way, um, and kind of trying to put that into an art form. Where back in the day we didn't really have any kind of, you know, we were just writing whatever worked. But these days, I think we try to tell a bit more of a story. I think our music has become a bit more like emotive and like provocative. Um, yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff on the new album is based around like, you know, we lost some friends during the making of that album to various things like suicide and addiction and stuff like that. So as we've gotten older and we've kind of learned more about what life is actually about, you know, as we've grown up, because we're all in our 30s now. We're not kids anymore, and I guess life, you know, has thrown us all some curveballs along the way. So I think we're trying to connect to people um, in a way that's like meaningful to us and hopefully meaningful to them as well.
Okay, yes, you mentioned some of the topics, the album topics, rejecting alliteration, and I would like to develop this conversation to that point. But first, focus a little bit on the past of the band. You mentioned that the beginning was like sort of just a fun approach doing heavy music. Um, and it was heavily attached to deathcore and heavily attached to, technical or the technicality or heavy music as a whole. To this
Mm.
day, that still remains the same. So, um, um how do you feel about deathcore these days? I mean, has the approach, in your opinion, diminished or evolved over the years?
Um, I've never really considered us like a deathcore band, but I mean, I know that like our earlier stuff definitely leaned towards some of that stuff, but I think it's been pretty insane how deathcore itself has evolved. Like some of the bands that are coming out now are just outrageous. Like I can't like I don't understand how they're getting some of the like production values and what people are doing with their vocals and stuff now. It's just
Yes,
unreal. Like it's mind blowing. But
yes.
um I think that we've tried to, with our newer music, like kind of create something that's a bit different, something that's kind of in its own lane, I guess. Um, yeah, I think we've got kind of like all the ingredients to make something that was probably a bit more accessible and sounded a bit more like some of those other bands, but we've kind of just chosen the path to try to do something a bit different. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mentioned this because it almost sounds like the band intentionally wanted to detach from the deathcore, part of their music. I mean, I know it was not your intention, but it sounds like you took a conscious effort to develop something more serious and just separate yourselves from the other atmosphere. Because to me also deathcore has become like a circus. nothing to take seriously, honestly. And also, in my opinion, one of the last great examples or one of the great deathcore examples of the last decade is actually from New Zealand. The band is Depths, and the album is
Oh, yeah.
Endless.
Yeah.
Just fantastic. And well, let's talk a bit about New Zealand scene, because in my impression and with my mates here, we have the impression that every now and then a new band comes to the surface with interesting ideas, new approach, originality, experimentation. So how do you live how does the country live, or you as a music enthusiast, your own scene?
The New Zealand scene is crazy right now. Like, there are some amazing bands coming out of this country. Bands like Organectomy, like they're on tour right now with Devourment in the States. They're doing so well. And bands like, Organectomy and Depths, they've kind of pushed the rest of the scene to like do better. So
Yes.
I think people have seen like the success that those bands have achieved and strived to reach those sort of levels. So as a whole, the scene in New Zealand is really healthy. There's lots of crazy bands. I just really hope that some of the bands that haven't really like released stuff yet but are amazing live, I'm hoping they really put the effort in and make some really great albums and capture what they're doing, because there is some crazy stuff here right now.
Okay, I will wait for those bands to appear in the surface. Um, but as I'm mentioning, an important part of the conversation has to be about the change the band has made, the different narrative into more serious and mature songwriting. And I mean, New Zealand has its own fair share of out of the box thinking metal bands. And just that year we have Tuscoma. I don't know if that's
Hmm.
how it's pronounced. So what made you decide to become another out of the box string metal act? It was a conscious effort, or just organically it happened?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. We've always wanted to be different. We've never wanted to kind of fit into any sort of box, which I think um, all of our albums are quite different in their own way. But as we've gotten more serious, I think the tone of the music itself has shifted into a more serious sound as well. So where maybe some of the stuff on our earlier albums was a bit like goofy and a little bit silly, we definitely kind of left that stuff behind, because some of the subject matter we're talking about, you wouldn't really have anything kind of goofy sounding or silly sounding when we're talking about some of the subject matters that we are. So as things have changed, it's all evolved together. And yeah, I kind of love the direction that we're heading in now. It feels a lot more meaningful to us. And yeah, yeah, we can take
So
ourselves and our music a bit more seriously.
definitely. So as you mentioned, life happened. Life send you some curves your way, and some the the heavy aspects of life. I'm guessing, and but besides from that, did your frame of reference change? I'm seeing you wearing a Portal T-shirt. So before and after, there was like a change also in your music appreciation to just develop your own style.
Um, I've always had like a very wide spectrum of listening, but I've always been more interested in the more underground bands. Um, and I think probably quite a lot of our band is the same in that regards. Um, I've never really connected with the more mainstream metal music. I love all the classic bands like Cannibal Corpse and Morbid Angel and all that kind of stuff, but I do find myself listening to more underground bands. But when it comes to like writing our music, I tried not to really be inspired by other metal bands too much. Um, I try to just kind of write write what I feel rather than trying to write something that needs to be something. I just kind of want to, like purely express what I'm feeling in music. So kind of just what comes out comes out.
It comes from a a primal point of view from of your
I think
own.
so, yeah. Mm.
Yeah, and what I like about your sound is that you are not necessarily playing death metal or any style in particular. It sounds like you are just approaching heaviness with the familiar tool dynamics to express range, discomfort, agony, and just a wide range of emotions. And that's what's interesting to me because I mean, that the band is not thinking in playing along the lines of particular styles, but instead using the elements to come up with your own ideas. I have been listening over and over this album, and it's hard to come up with a simple solution as to what it is or what is it that you guys are doing. I mean, it's complex for sure, but it's not superfluous complexity, if you know what I mean. So, for example, I just can't follow the narrative of your guitar playing. I can't quite grasp it and say, okay, it's this and this. And that is really it's rare for me at least to encounter something like that. I mean, for me as listener of or just fan of heavy music, I stopped caring about bands making music for the sake of a particular style or genre. What I want is to hear them do something else, even if it's not entirely original, just to push forward what has been done before, you know? And yes, what I like about Blindfolded is that, I mean, at some point, it's like you start messing with the dissonant spectrum and just start molding it as your own way. So, yes, I would like to ask you about how do you approach your composition, your writing as a whole?
Um, so I actually write like all of the music for the band. And
Oh,
then the rest of the band kind of puts their spin on what I write. So
okay.
it kind of starts
You
with
are the
me and
mastermind.
uh, I don't know if I'd say that, but it kind of starts with me and then everyone um sort of collaborates on it. And yeah, usually I'll like it's quite strange. I'll just start writing a song and I'll probably write our songs in about like 24 hours and that and that'll be it. It'll just be like that's what came out, that is the song, that's how I felt at that time. And you know I think that it's a very kind of raw way of looking at it. Like I don't like to tweak things too much because I kind of like to just follow the journey of what happens and what comes out and kind of stick with it. I think that we probably could mess with our music a lot more, but you start to take away from that like real sort of feeling that you had at that time when you wrote it. So we don't tend to like edit our music too much when it comes to song structures or anything like that. And as you said before, like we don't want to be writing music for the sake of just writing music. And I think like there are bands out there now that are so fast and so complex. I think all of those bases are kind of covered. And I don't really want to go out and be like the fastest or the most technical band on the planet. I want to just write good songs that people can connect with. Like that's more meaningful to us, I think, than trying to be the heaviest or be the fastest or be the most technical. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's definitely more meaningful to me, the experience of listening to your music nowadays. I mean, of course, I also grow up as a listener or enthusiast of this kind of music. And I mean, the band is categorized as avant-garde technical death metal, which I understand it has to be some attachment, some style attachment. But and I say it again, it's really rare to find a band that kind of fit within the spectrum of those styles. But at the same time, when you listen to the music itself, it doesn't necessarily fit in like the niche aspect of the genre, And again, it's fascinating to see a band doing this kind of approach to heavy music, because at the same time, in production wise, it doesn't necessarily detach from um, um, a good listening experience. You are bringing some production values to the table that are easy to listen to the instruments beyond, getting too fancy or too experimental. It's just more tangible that way, I would say.
Mm.
So
I
how do
think it's
you?
always, sorry.
No, please continue.
I think it's always been important to us to kind of capture each person's like playing. So like it's so easy these days to like program drums and even you can program like any instrument now.
Yes.
So I think for us it's more important to like capture like who we are and what our playing actually is. We've always recorded real drums and we've tried to keep everything quite organic in a way. And we could have taken our music down another path and gone for that like super extreme polished production, but I think we're trying to find like a happy medium where you're listening to real people in a room playing music, but then it's not so far in the other direction that it's unlistenable. Although I do, production's a weird thing to tackle because you kind of got to suit the vibe of the music itself, but yeah, it's a tough one. Yeah.
I guess what I try to say is the production makes it more approachable instead of,
Right.
because to a wider audience, which I guess is also one of your goals to engage with the listener as well. Yeah, and I think nowadays there's plenty of bands doing heavy music, on a daily basis. And at least for me, as the listener, what I want is for a band to try to outdo or just be original in its own. And I genuinely appreciate that you guys shift gears towards your approach. I encounter you again with Nightmare with Travels, and I see growth in this new album. And I would say that it was it took time, but it finally is getting some recognition your way, getting some record deal. I would like to ask you about this record deal. How did it happen? Why didn't it happen before? Uh, yeah, that sort of thing.
I think like we always, when we were young, a lot of bands have the dream. It's like we want to get a record deal, but the music industry has changed so much now that we spent a lot of time doing stuff independently, which is definitely a hard road. And like Nightmare Withdrawals was completely independent, but because of the kind of, I guess, success that it had, it put us in front of a lot of people that had never heard of us before. And just like the other albums, we tried to ship it out to as many record labels as we could to see if anyone would be interested in picking us up. And it just so happened that Nightmare Withdrawals did well, and it got us in front of some amazing people, and Prosthetic Records came to the party and wanted to work with us, and they've got a pretty amazing roster of bands and bands they've had in the past, so we were really open to working with them. And it was kind of a scary experience because we'd never been in that position before. We didn't really know what we were doing or how to tackle it, but they have just been absolutely amazing, like with helping us out to get to the next level and help us put more music out there and more music out there quicker. Excuse me. So yeah, like I think we turned around that rejecting obliteration. We made that in like 1 year from when Nightmare Withdrawals came out. So it was a really quick turnaround. But I actually had most of the album written, so we were able to already show them the demos of the new album, and
Okay.
yeah, and so they were happy because they were like, "Wow, you guys are already ready to go for the next one," and we were like, "Yep, we'll hit the studio and let's put it out there as soon as we can." And yeah,
I guess that's what the label wants, to put their money in something, in a band that is making actively efforts to continue to grow, right? As
yeah.
I imagine you do. Would you say that the industry has changed for the better since you introduced yourself as an artist, as a musician?
Um, to be honest, I think it's probably changed for the worse. I think that like COVID changed a lot for the music industry, and because bands couldn't tour, a lot was put into like online, like how can we still be a successful band but pretty much live online because we can't tour. And I think it's really changed the landscape of music. So music streaming and everything now is so much more common. Yeah, people want things like super quick now, and
Mm.
they want it like now, and then they move on to the next thing super quickly. So even a few years ago, you'd put out an album and people would sort of listen to it for longer, I think. And now the landscape's changed a bit, but it's a constantly evolving thing, and it's hard to
Maybe
tackle
maybe it has changed. I would say on a weekly basis, the
it.
rotation of new albums. And but I mean, it has its pros and cons because
Mm,
that kind of push the bands towards making something more memorable instead of just crossing their arms and say, okay, I did something and have this, but instead, like, make bigger efforts towards something authentic, aside from being honest, and tell a more memorable story or being more meaningful as a whole,
mm.
I would
Yeah,
say.
I'd agree with that. Yep, yep, I would agree with that.
um I also agree with the industry changed for the worst, because nowadays, I mean, it's easy for bands to follow a formula, be more generic, and gain some sort of success, being viral, just retain attention from a certain audience, and then earning a record deal just because of the buzz and being a more click biteable band. I don't know if that's a word, but
Yeah.
yes, and I guess it has always been the same. The business side of music, the industry will always kind of devour the new trends to make a business more profitable.
Mm,
But I guess no, I don't know. I guess I'm just also like a positive person in terms of focusing on the bands doing things for the better, because I
mm,
mean, now this is your first time as a signed band, and I can see that the future is bright, but I also can appreciate how you came to this point where you earned you paved your way toward this point. And how are you feeling about where you stand now as a band?
um, I I feel amazing about where we are now. I think it's always been a bit harder being a band that's trying to do something different, and I think any band that's trying to do something a bit different, you know, it makes it a little bit harder to market and things like that. But from our point of view, we're just making music that we love, and the fact that people want to listen to it, and you know, we've had some opportunities come our way to help us kind of get our music in front of more people. Like I couldn't be happier. Like I'm grateful for every little thing that's happened along the way. Yeah, like music is such a big part of my life, and it's been my life ever since I was a young child. So just to be able to play gigs and play with awesome bands and meet awesome people, like I couldn't be happier, you know.
I saw a review you shared on your profile about the projecting handshakes review. That was great. But what is stuck out for me, you have also an electronic project.
Yeah, yep.
And in what kind of focus do you do in the electronic project? What kind of music or
So
style?
it's I guess you would call it like experimental psy-core, I guess.
Mm.
Really, really fast, really weird. There's not
Up
really a scene. What's that?
above 2,200 BPMs per minute.
Yeah, yep, sort of getting up around 300, 350.
That's
Just
crazy.
really, yeah. There's not really a scene. Well, there's a little bit of a scene for it here in New Zealand, but I've found that people probably in your part of the world connect to it a lot more than what they do here. Um, so
Well,
I released an EP and an album, both through a friend of mine, Otkin, who runs a label in Canada. And yeah, most of the listeners of it are in like South America.
well, I'm familiar with Australia, maybe even New Zealand being very big in, I don't know, Xenon Records, Xenon type of artists. I don't know, you know, the label. You
Yep.
know, Sentient, Merkaba. I'm a huge fan of Merkaba. I love what the guys do, and I mean, one of my dreams is to one day go to one of the festivals there.
Oh, cool.
Uh, have you visited one of the festivals there?
No, I've never ventured out that far with this project. I've played some really cool festivals here in New Zealand though. I played one with Ruby My Dear and
Oh yeah.
Oroboro. Um, so that was like that was like a very underground festival, maybe like 500 people, but just amazing music.
Yes, and yeah, from this side we like psycore, high tech, all
Yeah.
those high energy electronic projects. So about the artwork, it's interesting to me the fact that you choose Eliran Cantor, one of the biggest illustrators these days, and also the designed aspect of the album cover, like the loop, the arm biting each other. So was this your idea or the artist idea, or what kind of direction did you give Eliran for this piece?
So it was actually our guitarist Ben that kind of came up with like a bit of like a prompt of what the album was about. And the album talks a lot about like trauma and the cycles of trauma. Um, so we kind of gave him full creative control to kind of come up with something, because I really like, I saw the Venom prison
Mm.
cover that he did, and I was just like, that is amazing. Like I would, and I never ever thought that we would get to work with someone like that, but we actually asked Prosthetic Records if they could get in touch with them and see if we could work together. And funnily enough, they kind of like had worked with him, they knew him. So it just kind of worked out really well. And yeah, so we just gave him full creative control, and what he came up with, we would just absolutely just so happy with. And yeah, with the like cycle, there's some lyrical content on our album that sort of talks about those cycles of trauma from like childhood that kind of follow you through your whole life. And you know, if you don't do your best to break those cycles, you can pass those same traumas on to other people. And so I guess the character sort of chewing out their own arm trying to break that cycle is quite an important and like powerful message of the art. Because you know, they're desperately trying to break or remove a part of themselves to escape in a way, I guess. So yeah, it's quite a powerful and meaningful work for us.
Meaningful and also very clever choice of artwork. I don't remember. Yeah, I don't really remember any other artwork doing this kind of exercise in the album cover. Now that you mentioned the trauma and mental health issues, you mentioned on the behind-the-scenes video of hallucinative terror about your country having a massive problem with suicide, which I think is a global problem, honestly. But one of the phrases, one of the words that stuck out to me was what it means to be a listener for the person who is struggling with those things. And I don't know if you are familiar with your label mates Rooster, but a couple of months ago, Sermon released a really great album, and I talked to him about the music, and he mentioned that one of the songs, Distance, talks about the distance between the thought of suicide and the action, and how important it is between those two spaces for us, for the other person, to really approach, to really do something, to like, maybe we are really ignorant about what we could do to help the other person. So on that regard, what is your takeaway about this subject as a whole, or even in the song itself?
I think it's a hard one for us to tackle and to talk about because it's so real. And actually, the original bass player who was in the band before Blindfolded, he unfortunately took his own life while we were writing this album. So it was a very real thing that we were all going through at that time, and we've all been affected by it in different ways in the past. And yeah, as you mentioned, New Zealand's got one of like the highest suicide rates per population on the planet. So I think we're like in the top 3, and it's terrible here. So you know, we know how much it's affecting people in our own country, and we kind of wanted to bring light to that because our government and things don't really put enough into helping people here and helping people with severe mental health issues. So there's a lot of people doing really amazing things on sort of like a ground level, volunteers, people doing stuff themselves. And that's always been super inspiring. So we just kind of wanted to, yeah, I mean, reach out to people and let them know that, you know, they aren't alone. And it's a really hard one to tackle. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no right way to approach. I mean, because at least for taking from myself, I don't know how. I will try definitely, and I will be there for any person to require my help. But I don't know if I could give the right help, the right, attention, the right words, if I have it. So yeah, it's important also for heavy music to start dealing with these subjects, instead of focusing in the, I don't know, hate, violence, to be more real and address more real subjects that are nowadays problems from modern societies. So thank you for bringing that up. That's another level of your music that we can appreciate. Just the honesty and the what you guys are dealing. And what can you tell me about the album concept as a whole? I mean, does it have a particular concept or like a red thread behind all of the songs in particular?
I think lyrically, it definitely talks a lot about, as we said, like the cycles of trauma. It talks a lot about suffering and how, as humans in this kind of day and age where there's so much like poverty and it's a really sort of hard world to navigate at the best of times. A lot of people are kind of suffering just to survive day by day. So, and we see that a lot in our lives. And yeah, I guess, yeah, it's quite a dark album lyrically. And I know that there were things on there that we sort of discussed, like, do we really want to open ourselves up this much as people? Because some of the stuff we're talking about on there is real life for us.
But it's written in a cryptic way or more
Yeah, I think
transparent?
so. Yeah. We haven't made anything too kind of like in your face, you know. I think we tried to be like poetic and metaphoric about things, but yeah, it's quite it's been sort of a hard album in ways, but it's also been a chance of like healing for us, I think.
Right.
So
Right.
making some of that stuff into art and
Right.
yeah, a little bit of catharsis, I guess.
Yeah, I can imagine. So this album was a cathartic effort to grow, to heal some of your problems. But it was done in the past. So I hope that you guys are moving to a better place in
Yeah,
current times.
I think now that we've done this album that kind of talked a lot about that stuff that we probably have wanted to talk about before, I think the next album is going to be very different again.
Okay.
So I think the next one we're gonna come at from a completely different angle again. So yeah, we're always trying to change it up and do something different and outdo ourselves. But
In
yeah, we're
terms,
already talking about the next one and how we're gonna
oh,
do that.
perfect. So in terms of music, we'll develop these ideas, but in terms of lyrics, will be something different.
I would think so, yeah. I think you know, the next one might end up a bit of like a concept album or something like that. So we're toying with ideas in the background. Yeah.
How important do you think it is for you to keep experimenting with new sounds, ideas?
Oh, that's the most important.
That's the use.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, always trying to do something different, always experimenting. Um, and like we sort of talked about earlier, I do quite a bit with electronic music. So I'm trying to, I mean, there's a lot more sort of elements of that in rejecting obliteration. There's more sort of synth stuff going on. And I think we'd probably keep expanding on that because we're we're bringing in elements into our music that we've never had before, and I really appreciate us being able to do that and not being afraid to do that, you know.
I feel like we didn't touch quite. We didn't quite emerge on the album, but I would like to ask you about. Well, just mention some parts of the album that I like, some ideas. I mean, there's some messing around with kind of electronic textures here and there, and also some kind of tribal percussions in one of my favorite songs. Um, I mean, it's hard to mention just one song as a favorite. I have in my queuing. So there are 10 songs. I have 6 songs as my favorites. Uh, but it's because of some elements to I personally like about experimenting as a whole. My question would be, could we expect a more far out, forward thinking elements in your music for the next time?
I think so. Yeah. I think the way the next one is developing currently, I think it's probably going to be the most outrageous one yet. Um, we already have a good body of demos done for the next one, and yeah, there's a lot going on, a lot of new ideas. Um, definitely expanding on some of the stuff we've done on the last two albums, but um, I think the next one we're really going to be really pushing ourselves musically. Um, yeah, yeah. I think the next one's going to be quite different.
Okay, so three last more questions before I let you go. Uh, okay, one, you also manage your own electronic project, so that alone is a nice opportunity to just mess around with your other project, which is Blindfolded. So has having this project, side project, in some way informed you or educated you as to what kind of approach could or change could you make in Blindfolded, being being you like the main composer of the song structures?
Yeah, I would definitely say that. Um, yeah, making electronic music is a whole different thing, and I'm still learning a lot with it. I'm definitely not like an amazing producer or mixer or anything like that. But I really enjoy it, and I really enjoy um, actually making heavy music in a different way. So like
Mm.
metal traditionally being heavy drums, heavy guitar tones and whatnot. Um, and then sort of matching that with electronic sounds and still creating something really heavy, I have found really interesting. Um, and then being able to make like drums that are humanly impossible to play, like
Right.
really fast stuff that is
There's
just
also
ludicrous.
that's also an interesting point of view. You being a drummer, how you can address your own music. I mean, I don't know if you are familiar with the band Botanist, black metal band.
No,
But that's a drummer mainly who,
right.
who plays black metal, but instead of guitars, um, insert hammered dulcimer as an instrument.
Oh wow.
So so he first write a drum piece of music and then hammer dulcimer, so the drums are the main point for the whole songs to take form. I'm guessing too at some points you were, well, that's a wild guess, but it's an interesting point of view, like the drums being the conductor instead of lyrics or guitars or riffs.
Mm.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah, that sounds awesome. I'll have to check that project out. That sounds crazy.
yeah, Botanist from San Francisco. There's a new
Cool.
album coming the next week, same day as your album release. Um, Second question. I always like to ask my in my interviews for a recommendation, the artist for the art from the artist, and in this case, one that you think is doing interesting stuff for you, not just in metal but also in electronic. What can you recommend for us?
Um, I really enjoyed the new Bjork album. Um, that was really strange, and yeah, really enjoyed that. As far as metal goes, I'm really digging the new Devangelic album, um,
Oh,
Zul, because I'm a huge Nile fan. Like Nile's one of my favorite bands ever, um, and they've kind of captured a Nile sort of vibe on that new album, and it's kind of Yeah, it's different. It's like Nile and Disgorge smashed together, and I'm really digging it.
Yeah, we love these records. Always put in some incredible stuff. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And final question, if you could relate I mean, I know this is a heavy one, but if you could attach uh, something different for this album or the band as a whole, beyond your music or beyond any other type of music, to another form of work or form of art, like a movie, a painting, and a sculpture, a book, which one would it be and why?
That is a tough question. I've never really thought about that. um, I kind of like the idea of our music being somewhat like poetry. I don't really have any poetry that I would even know to compare it to, but I like the idea of like poetic music. For example, like um, growing up listening to like Pig Destroyer and reading Pig Destroyer lyrics, I was always just fascinated by the poetry of those. So, yeah, yeah, that's a really tough question.
I mean, this question is because sometimes you have some visual image in your mind, in the back of your mind, maybe a movie like, oh, I remember this happened, and or watching this or reading this thing. And what I try to capture is that recommendation from the artist, like to understand better, the piece of work. But thank you for your honest answer.